I want you to picture this. Just really put yourself in this scene. You are standing in the sleepy rural English village of Woolpit.
Right, way back in the past.
Exactly. It is the height of the 12th century. It's harvest time, which means, the air is thick with the smell of cut wheat, damp earth, and just, well, the sweat of almost every able-bodied person in the village.
Yeah, everyone would be out there working.
Right. The entire community is out working the fields. They're exhausted, trying to pull enough calories out of the dirt just to survive the coming winter. And at the edge of the woods, bordering this farmland, there are these deep, terrifyingly steep trenches dug right into the earth.
The wolf pits.
Yeah, the wolf pits. They're specifically designed to trap the desperate predators that threaten the village's livestock. So you're looking at this brutal, mundane scene. But then suddenly, out of the shadows of these dark pits, two children emerge.
Oh, wow.
A boy and an older girl. And they look absolutely terrified. They are speaking this rapid, frantic babble that no one in the village can decipher. And they're wearing clothes made of this bizarre, unrecognizable fabric.
Which would have been so jarring for them.
Incredibly jarring. But the detail that makes the reapers actually drop their scythes, the detail that ensures we are still dissecting their story 900 years later, is that their skin is entirely vividly green.
Yeah, it's just an image that completely shatters that mundane, brutal reality of medieval agrarian life, right?
Exactly.
You have the sweat and the dirt of the harvest, and then the sudden, surreal injection of the impossible.
And that collision of the mundane and the impossible is exactly why we are plunging into this today. Welcome to today's deep dive on the Green Children of Woolpit.
It's such a fascinating case.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to figure this out with you. We want to answer one fundamental question. Are we looking at a garbled, confused record of a very real, tragic historical event involving displaced refugees?
Right.
Or are we looking at a profound medieval psychological breakdown, like a case study in how human beings process the terrifying concept of the other?
Yeah, and we really need to set a baseline here for you, the listener, because, when you hear a phrase like green children emerging from a wolf pit,
Your brain just goes straight to fairy tales, right?
exactly. Your 21st century brain immediately categorizes that as folklore. You put it in the exact same mental box as Hansel and Gretel.
Right, of course.
But that is fundamentally not how this was recorded. This wasn't just some bedtime story passed down by oral tradition. This was documented as absolute physical fact by serious credential historians of the era.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
And we're going to dive deep into those specific chroniclers, William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall, and we'll be cross-referencing them with this massive stack of sources we have today.
It's a really impressive stack.
Yeah. We're looking at modern academic historiography, folkloric analyses from scholars like Makarsh Madej, Paul Harris, Derek Brewer, and Jeffrey Jerome Cohen. Plus, we're pulling from Reddit community theories and local British folklore blogs just to see how the story lives on today.
Which gives us a great 360-degree view.
It really does. But before we get to the men who wrote it down, we have to understand the world these kids supposedly stumbled into. This isn't just the Middle Ages as some generic jousting in castles backdrop.
Oh, not at all.
This is smack in the middle of the 12th century, likely during the reign of King Stephen. And for those of you who follow medieval history, you know exactly what a bloodbath the 1140s and 50s were.
It was horrific.
Yeah, this period wasn't just harsh, it was completely broken. They literally called it the anarchy.
And honestly, the anarchy is the absolute key to unlocking the psychology of this story. You just cannot understand the villagers of Woolpit without understanding the trauma they were living through.
Because the whole system was collapsing.
Exactly. King Stephen and his cousin, the Empress Matilda, were fighting this devastating, protracted civil war of succession for the English throne. Central authority basically just evaporated.
I always try to imagine what that actually feels like on the ground, Because it's not just armies moving on a map. When the king's law disappears, the local barons basically turn into warlords, right?
Precisely. They built these unlicensed castles, they call them adulterine castles, and used them as bases to just terrorize the local peasantry.
Ugh, terrifying.
It was. They hired legions of foreign mercenaries who ravaged the countryside. They were stealing harvests, burning villages, and literally torturing people for hidden coin. The agrarian economy completely collapsed.
So people are just starving.
Severe famines everywhere. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle famously wrote of this specific time that Christ and his saints were asleep. literally felt like the end of the world to these people.
Okay, so let's unpack this for a second. Think about the psychological toll of that.
Yeah.
If you are a villager in Woolpit, your daily reality is defined by trauma, starvation, and hypervigilance.
Constant fear.
Yeah. You are living in a society where the normal rules of order are suspended. It's like a post-apocalyptic movie where the rules of reality just don't apply anymore. To me, that implies a populace that is primed for the supernatural.
Oh, absolutely.
If your world is already a living nightmare where mercenaries might ride out of the woods and burn your house down any day, your threshold for the magical or the miraculous, it just plummets.
It's a great way to put it.
So, I mean, how much does this chaotic environment guarantee that any strange event gets a supernatural spin? Every shadow in the forest is a monster. Every strange occurrence is a sign from God.
That is the exact sociological environment. When a community's daily life is completely destabilized, the extraordinary becomes a tool to make sense of the unbearable. The villagers' psychological landscape was just as fractured as their political one.
Okay, so hold that ambient trauma in your mind as we go back to the discovery at the edge of the fields.
Right, back to the wolf pits.
Yeah. The Reapers, who are already living in this hyper-anxious, superstitious state, they find these two strange green children crying by the wolf pit. And they don't know what to do with them, so they essentially just pass the buck up the feudal ladder.
Which makes sense. You take them to the boss.
Exactly. They take him to the local authority, a knight named Sir Richard de Coligny, at his manor in Wykes, which is about 6 miles north of Woolpit.
And this is where we get the first set of incredibly specific, visceral details from the sources.
Yeah, the dietary details, it's so weird. They bring these kids into the manor, and the kids are clearly starving. Like, their ribs are showing they are desperate. But they absolutely refuse all normal food.
Nothing the English would eat.
Right. The servants bring them bread, meat, thick pottage stews, which is the absolute foundation of medieval caloric survival, by the way, and the children won't even touch it.
They'd rather starve.
Literally. They go for days without eating, practically starving themselves to death in a manor house full of food.
But then comes the breakthrough. And it revolves around a very specific crop, raw broad beans.
Yes. Oh my gosh. This detail. Someone brings in a freshly harvested crop of broad beans, still on the stalk. The children see the green plants, and they absolutely lose their minds.
They just attack it.
They eagerly tear into them. But here is the bizarre part. They don't open the pods to get the beans out. They tear into the green stalks themselves. And when they find that the stalks are hollow and empty, they break down into bitter, hysterical weeping.
It's such a striking image.
Wait, hold on. This detail always trips me up. Why would they assume the food is in the stalk? I mean, if they are human children, even from a different culture, how do you not know how a plant works?
It's a brilliant question, and it points to a profound disconnect. It suggests they recognize the color, or perhaps the general shape of the plant, as something vaguely familiar from their home.
But they didn't actually know the mechanics of eating it.
Right. They lacked the specific agricultural knowledge of this particular crop. It's as if they were mimicking the act of eating without understanding the anatomy of the plant itself.
Wow.
So finally, one of the villagers takes a bean pod, cracks it open, and shows them the actual beans nestled inside. And the children are overjoyed. And according to the historical records, they survive on nothing but raw, broad beans for months.
It's just such a pathetic, highly specific image, you know? Like a fabricated fairy tale might just say, oh, and the fairy children only ate magical dew.
Exactly. It would be stylized.
Right. But the detail of mistaking the stalk for the pod, the bitter weeping, the eventual reliance on this single nutrient-poor crop, it doesn't feel like a trope. It has the texture of a lived event.
It really does.
It sounds like someone genuinely trying to describe an eyewitness memory of profound cultural or physical misunderstanding.
And the aftermath of this dietary shift is where the physical reality of the children begins to actually change.
Because they can't live on beans forever.
No, they can't. The household gradually manages to wean them off this exclusive diet of raw beans. They slowly introduce oats, baked bread, and eventually meats.
And as their diet normalizes, the primary sources explicitly note that their green color gradually fades away. They just start to look like normal, pale English children.
The magic sort of washes off them.
Yeah, they are assimilated. They are eventually baptized into the Christian faith. But that assimilation comes with a brutal cost, doesn't it?
It does. It really does. The younger boy, who was already described as more lethargic and sickly from the start, he falls into a deep depression.
Oh, that's so sad.
He fails to thrive on the new diet, grows increasingly weak, and dies shortly after his baptism.
It's just tragic. He survives whatever horrific ordeal brought him to the wolf pits, only to die in the safety of a wealthy manor. But the older girl thrives, right?
Yes, she does. She adapts physically, she learns to speak the English language fluently, and she is given the Christian name Agnes.
Okay, so Agnes.
She goes on to work as a servant in Sir Richard de Calne's household, and eventually, she actually marries a man from King's Lynn and lives a full life.
And the fact that she learns English is the hinge of the entire mystery. Because once she can actually communicate, the entire manor and eventually the entire region wants to know, where did you come from?
Exactly. Why were you green and where are your parents?
Yes. And the explanation she gives them is the tale of St. Martin's Land. She tells her foster family that she and her brother came from a subterranean or perhaps parallel place.
A whole different world.
Yeah. She says there is no full sun there. It's a land of perpetual twilight, lit only by a dim light, kind of like the moments just after sunset. And critically, she says that in St. Martin's Land, everything is green, and all the people there possess this same green skin.
The world building she provides is just incredibly intricate. She describes a complete subterranean ecology.
Right. But what strikes me is how mundane their lives were before they got lost. She says they were just herding their father's flocks. Some sources say sheep, some say cattle.
Just normal agricultural work.
Yeah. And then suddenly they hear this incredibly loud, beautiful sound like the chiming of massive bells. They follow this acoustic anomaly, wandering into a dark cave or an underground passage.
And they keep walking.
They walk for what feels like hours, and then completely out of nowhere, they emerge into the blinding, terrifying, full sunlight of Woolpit, right by the wolf trenches.
See, what's fascinating here is the internal logic of her story. It's what elevates this above simple folklore for a lot of people.
How so?
Well, she doesn't describe a chaotic realm of monsters. She describes a parallel, culturally recognizable society. She explicitly notes that the people of St. Martin's Land were Christian and that they had churches.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, she even names the land after St. Martin of Tours. So this isn't just a traumatized child pointing at the sky and babbling. She is providing a structured geopolitical origin story that made sense to her 12th century interrogators.
Which brings us perfectly to the men who actually interrogated this story and wrote it down. Because, like we established, if this was just a campfire rumor passed down by local peasants, we wouldn't be dedicating an hour to it.
We'd have never even heard of it.
Exactly. The reason Agnes and her brother are etched into history is because of two independent, highly respected medieval writers. And we really need to understand who these guys were.
Right, their credibility is everything here.
Because if we are going to judge the validity of the story, we have to judge the credibility of the men who recorded it. So let's look at them.
Let's start with William of Newburgh. You can think of him as the reluctant, distant intellectual. So William, he's an Augustinian canon from Yorkshire.
Okay.
And he's writing his major work, the Historia Rerum Anglicarum, the history of English affairs toward the end of the 12th century, around 1189 to 1198.
Okay, let's unpack Augustinian canon for a second, because that sounds like a guy who just prays all day, which might make a modern listener dismiss his scientific rigor. What does that title actually mean in the context of the 1190s?
It's a really vital distinction. He wasn't just a monk hiding in a cloistered cell meditating on the afterlife. An Augustinian canon was a cleric who lived in a community under a strict rule, sure, but their focus was often outward.
Outward in what way?
On preaching, pastoral care, and theology. And you have to remember, the late 12th century is sometimes called a Renaissance because there was a massive revival of classical learning, law, and critical historical writing.
Ah, so he's part of an intellectual wave.
Deeply embedded in it. William was trying to write a serious, prestigious, unified history of the English nation, modeling himself on the great historians of antiquity. He was deeply concerned with documented truth and had a massive academic reputation to protect.
And geographically, Yorkshire is hundreds of miles north of Suffolk, where Woolpit actually is. So he's far away, and he's highly academic, which is exactly what makes his inclusion of this story so fascinating.
It really is.
Because he explicitly admits in his text that he really did not want to write about the Green Children. He calls the story a strange prodigy that defies all natural reason.
He was embarrassed by it, honestly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If I'm William of Newburgh and I'm trying to write the definitive, serious history of my country, including a story about green kids crawling out of a wolf pit, actively undermines my academic goals.
Oh, completely.
It makes my serious history book look like a collection of peasant superstitions.
Mhm.
So why do it?
Right, it was a massive professional risk, yet he includes it. Why? Well, he writes that he was, quote, crushed sufficiently that I am forced to believe it.
Crushed sufficiently.
Yeah. The sheer volume and weight of testimony from so many trustworthy witnesses completely overwhelmed his natural skepticism. He fought against the narrative, but the evidence presented to him by people he deemed credible left him absolutely no choice but to record it as historical fact.
That is a staggering endorsement.
Yeah.
He's essentially saying, look, I know this sounds utterly insane. Please don't judge the rest of my history book by this one entry. But too many sober, serious people swear on their lives that it happened.
Exactly.
So that's our distant intellectual. What about the other chronicler?
The other source is Ralph of Coggeshall. And if William is the distant, skeptical academic, Ralph is the local, well-connected insider.
Who died with his ear to the ground.
Exactly. He was the 6th abbot of a Cistercian monastery in Essex, and he's writing his Chronicon Anglicanum a bit later, around the 1220s.
And Essex is right next door to Suffolk. How close was his monastery to Woolpit?
Very close. The Abbey of Coggeshall was only about 26 to 40 miles south of Woolpit.
Oh, that's nothing.
Right, but the geographic proximity isn't even the most important part. Ralph claims a direct personal line of transmission. A Cistercian abbot would be highly integrated into the local aristocratic networks.
So he knew the players.
He did, and Ralph explicitly states that he heard the story frequently and directly from Sir Richard de Calmy himself, the man who fostered the children, and from the members of his household.
Wait, really? So Ralph actually sat down and interviewed the foster father. He spoke to the guy whose servants fed them the beans.
That is exactly his claim, and you can see the results of that access in his writing. William gives us the broad strokes, the theological puzzle, but Ralph gives us the intimate domestic minutiae.
Right, their beanstalk.
Yes, it's Ralph who tells us about the children weeping over the empty beanstalks. And crucially, it's Ralph who gives us an update on Agnes's personality later in life.
Oh, what does he say?
He describes her as being very wanton and impudent, meaning somewhat loose, rebellious, or difficult to control while working as a servant in the manor.
Okay, here's the piece I'm struggling with, though. We have two medieval historians writing about the exact same weird event. Are we absolutely sure they didn't just copy each other?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because medieval chroniclers were notorious for just plagiarizing earlier manuscripts without citing them.
It's the first question modern historians ask. But literary scholars who have meticulously analyzed the Latin syntax of both texts, like Micavenege, strongly argue that they are completely independent accounts.
How can they tell?
Their prose styles are night and day. William's Latin is lofty, philosophical, and Baroque. Ralph's is straightforward, localized, and commentary-driven. Furthermore, they include differing details that prove they drew from different initial sources. Ralph names the source Richard de Calny, while William vaguely cites many trustworthy witnesses. The academic consensus is ironclad. They did not copy each other.
So if we synthesize that, two independent, highly educated men, one risking his academic reputation and the other interviewing the primary witnesses, both conclude this happened. That forces us to treat this as a physical reality. Something flesh and blood occurred in Woolpit during the harvest. So if we strip away the magic, what earthly explanations actually fit the facts?
Let's get into the theories.
Yeah, let's dive into the most prominent historical hypothesis, the Flemish refugee theory. Break this down for us. Why are we suddenly talking about people from Belgium?
Well, to understand this theory, which is championed by modern researchers like Paul Harris, we have to look at the massive demographic shifts in 12th century England.
Okay.
During the 11th and 12th centuries, there was a huge influx of Flemish immigrants into England from the Low Countries, modern-day Belgium, and the Netherlands.
Why were they coming over in the first place?
Primarily economics. The English economy was heavily dependent on the wool trade, but they needed highly skilled weavers to process it into high-value cloth. The Flemish were the master weavers of Europe, so they were brought over to boost the industry.
Makes sense.
But alongside the weavers came thousands of Flemish mercenaries. King Stephen relied on these mercenaries heavily during the anarchy. They were his shock troops, enforcing his will across the countryside.
Ah, so the local peasants absolutely hated them.
With a burning passion. And when Henry II took the throne in 1154, the political winds shifted violently. Henry's mandate was to unify the country and restore law and order, which meant getting rid of the foreign mercenaries who had terrorized the populace for 2 decades.
So they turned on them.
Hard. The Flemish suddenly faced intense, state-sponsored xenophobic persecution. They went from being the king's hired enforcers to being hunted outlaws overnight.
And how does Harris connect this geopolitical shift to 2 terrified kids eating beans in Suffolk?
Because of a very specific, bloody event that happened right in Woolpit's backyard. In October 1173, there was the Battle of Fornham St. Martin.
Okay, Fornham St. Martin.
A rebel army, bolstered by roughly 3,000 Flemish mercenaries, was definitively crushed by royal forces just a few miles from Woolpit. The historical records recount that the surviving mercenaries broke rank and fled into the local swamps and dense forests.
Where the locals were waiting.
Exactly, where they were mercilessly slaughtered by the local English peasants, the exact same peasants who had suffered under their raids for years.
Wow. Okay. So Harris is theorizing a brutal, tragic narrative here.
Yeah.
He suggests these 2 children were the offspring of Flemish settlers or mercenaries who were caught in this slaughter.
Yes.
The parents are killed, and the newly orphaned children flee in blind terror into the deep woods.
Exactly. Harris posits they fled into the dense, dark canopy of Thetford Forest, or perhaps into the ancient labyrinthine underground flint mines of the region, like the famous Grimes Graves. Have you ever seen photos of Grimes Graves?
I actually haven't. What are they?
They are a massive network of Neolithic flint mines, hundreds of deep shafts dropping into the earth, connecting to a maze of pitch-black subterranean galleries. If terrified children hid down there to escape a massacre, they would literally be living in an underground, sunless world.
Okay, I see the architecture of this theory coming together. The perpetual twilight they described.
Was the dark forest canopy or the pitch-black tunnels of those flint mines?
The loud, beautiful bells they followed out of the darkness.
Those would be the famously loud, constant bells of the nearby abbey of Bury St. Edmunds ringing for the daily monastic offices.
And the alien gibberish they spoke. The rabid babble the reapers couldn't understand.
It was simply Flemish, a Germanic language that the rural, isolated Suffolk peasants didn't comprehend.
Okay, I have to admit, it is a brilliantly neat theory. It ties up the twilight, the bells, the caves, and the language into a perfect historical bow. But I'm sorry, I have to push back here.
Go for it.
That just doesn't track for me logically on a couple of major fronts.
Please do. It's a theory that looks pristine from a distance, but invites heavy scrutiny up close.
First, the language barrier. Let's say the illiterate reapers in the field had never heard Flemish before. I'll buy that.
Sure, they're isolated.
But they didn't keep the kids in the field. They took them to Sir Richard de Coligny. We just established this guy was a high-ranking, educated knight. He lived in East Anglia, an area that had been literally teeming with Flemish weavers, merchants, and soldiers for over 50 years.
Right.
Furthermore, some historical digging suggests Richard de Coligny was tied to the king's administration. Are you honestly telling me that an educated, connected knight in 12th century East Anglia wouldn't even recognize the sound of the Flemish language?
It is a massive stretch.
Right. He might not speak it fluently, but he would absolutely know what it sounded like. If 2 kids showed up speaking a neighboring country's language, he wouldn't declare it an unearthly alien babble from a twilight dimension. He'd just say, oh, they're Flemish.
That is the gaping hole in Harris's theory. The idea that a nobleman in that specific region, deeply embedded in the politics of his time, wouldn't recognize the language of his region's most prominent minority group strains all historical credulity.
And second, there's a massive timeline issue, right?
Yeah.
William of Newburgh explicitly dates this event to the reign of King Stephen. Stephen died in 1154. The Battle of Fornham St. Martin. The massive mercenary slaughter that serves as the linchpin of this entire refugee theory happened in 1173.
Right, almost 20 years later.
That is a 20-year discrepancy. To make this theory work, we have to assume that William of Newburgh, a historian so meticulous that he agonized over whether to even include the story, somehow got the reigning monarch wrong by 2 decades.
You are absolutely correct. The chronology is highly problematic. While it's true that Flemish persecution occurred sporadically before the battle, tying the children specifically to the Fornham massacre requires us to aggressively massage the primary sources.
Okay, but let's say we ignore the timeline, and we assume Sir Richard just had a really bad ear for languages. The absolute elephant in the room is the color.
Ah, yes, the green skin.
Flemish people are not green. If these are just two terrified kids from Belgium running away from a battle, why on earth is their skin vividly green?
Well, for that, the earthly explanations have to pivot away from history and look to medical pathology. And the most robust medical theory points to a historical condition known as chlorosis, which was colloquially referred to as the green sickness.
The green sickness. I've actually seen references to that in Victorian literature and Shakespeare, usually applied to lovesick young women. But what exactly is it biologically?
Biologically, it is a severe form of hypochromic anemia. It is brought on by a profound, prolonged deficiency in iron and protein. Let's break down the mechanics.
Okay, let's hear it.
Your red blood cells rely on a protein called hemoglobin to carry oxygen throughout your body. Hemoglobin requires iron to be synthesized. If you lack the iron, the raw material, your body simply cannot produce enough hemoglobin.
So it's like trying to run a massive factory, your circulatory system, without the necessary raw materials. If you don't have the iron to build the red blood cells, the machinery slows down, and the physical building itself starts to deteriorate.
That's a great analogy.
But how does a lack of oxygen make you green? If I don't get enough oxygen, I turn pale, or maybe blue if I'm choking.
It has to do with the specific breakdown of blood pigments in people with naturally low melanin. When the red tint of oxygenated hemoglobin is drastically reduced, the underlying color of the blood plasma and subcutaneous fat becomes much more visible.
Oh, wow.
In severe cases of chlorosis, this doesn't just manifest as a ghostly white pallor. It presents as a waxy, distinctly greenish-yellow tint to the skin.
That is fascinating. Okay, so apply that biology to our two kids in the wolf pit.
It maps almost flawlessly. If these children were lost in the forest or hiding in those dark flint mines for weeks or months, surviving on whatever they could scavenge, roots, berries, dirty water, they would become profoundly malnourished.
Their iron would just crash.
Exactly. Their iron and protein levels would crash. Furthermore, when they were found, they initially refused all food except raw broad beans. Beans contain compounds that can actually inhibit iron absorption if not cooked properly.
Wait, really? So they were making it worse?
Yes. So their initial diet in captivity would only exacerbate the hypochromic anemia, deepening the green tint.
And here's the absolute kicker for the medical theory. The chronicles explicitly record that once the children were taken in and gradually assimilated to a better English diet of baked bread and meat foods packed with bioavailable iron and protein, their green color faded away.
Exactly. The medical recovery perfectly mirrors the narrative arc provided by the chroniclers. They didn't lose their magic because they were baptized. They lost their green skin because they finally absorbed iron.
That is incredibly compelling. It takes the most fantastical element of the story and grounds it in brutal biological reality.
It's very clean.
But because we have to look at all the theories swirling around this case, I have to bring up a much darker medical theory I found in some of the folklore blogs.
Let me guess.
A sort of babes in the woods scenario involving poison.
Ah, yes. The arsenic poisoning hypothesis.
Right. So the theory posits, what if this isn't about refugees at all? What if it's a localized crime?
Like an attempted murder.
Yes. Imagine an evil guardian, say, an uncle who wants to steal his ward's inheritance. He poisons the two children with arsenic and abandons them in the dense woods to die.
Straight out of a dark fairy tale.
Exactly. The children miraculously survive the exposure, but chronic arsenic poisoning can cause severe hyperpigmentation, a green-dotted skin rash, and intense neurological delirium. That would explain why their skin looked green, and it would explain why they were babbling deliriously about twilight worlds and bells.
It's a wonderfully grim Gothic theory, I'll give it that. But it completely falls apart when you apply basic medieval sociology to it.
How so? Why wouldn't that work?
Think about the mindset of a 12th century peasant. They are living in an era terrified of plague, leprosy, and divine punishment manifesting as physical corruption.
Right. Disease was seen as a curse.
Exactly. If two strange children emerged from the woods covered in a sickly, green-dotted, oozing rash, the reapers of Woolpit would not have gently taken them by the hand and marched them up to the local lord's manor.
Oh, I see where you're going.
A strange child with a severe skin rash would have been treated as a massive contagion risk. They would have been driven away with pitchforks, not fostered. The green described by the chroniclers and observed by Sir Richard's household seems to have been a uniform pallor, an innate coloration, not a diseased, contagious rash.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
You absolutely do not hug the kid with the mysterious green rash in the year 1150. You run the other way.
Precisely.
So let's step back and look at the board here. If we rely strictly on earthly physical explanations, we kind of hit dead ends. The Flemish refugee theory has massive holes regarding language recognition and chronological timelines.
Right.
The medical theory of chlorosis explains the skin color beautifully, but it completely fails to explain the bizarre, structured underground twilight world they described or the strange language they spoke.
It leaves half the mystery unsolved.
And if the earthly reality doesn't perfectly fit the facts, we are forced to ask a different question. What if these kids weren't human refugees at all, but cultural scapegoats? What does this story symbolize? We have to look at the cultural machinery of the medieval mind.
This is a crucial pivot. Because when you read the primary sources, not as literal police reports, but as texts steeped in 12th century belief systems, the story is absolutely overflowing with screaming red flags for folklore.
Let's start with the most glaring one, the color green. We spent all this time trying to medically diagnose it, but what did green actually mean to a peasant in the Middle Ages?
Well, in medieval European folklore, green is not just a color. It is a geographic and spiritual indicator.
Meaning what?
It is deeply, inextricably tied to the other world, the realm of the fairies, the spirits of nature, and the dead. Think of the green man carved into the stonework of medieval churches, representing untamed nature.
Oh.
Or think of the supernatural green knight in Arthurian legend who survives being beheaded. If a medieval peasant sees a humanoid entity with green skin, their immediate cultural framework doesn't say hypochromic anemia. It says this being is from the fairy realm.
And it's not just their skin that signals the other world. It's their diet, the absolute refusal to eat anything but broad beans.
Yes. The renowned folklorist K.M. Briggs has pointed out that in several European traditions, beans were historically considered the food of the dead or heavily associated with ghosts and the underworld.
Wait, why beans? What makes a legume spooky?
It stems from a mix of agrarian reality and ancient tradition. Beans grow in twisting, subterranean ways, and their roots fix nitrogen deep in the soil. More importantly, this belief stretches back to Roman antiquity.
Really? How far back?
During the festival of Lemuria, Romans would throw black beans over their shoulders to pacify restless household spirits. These ancient superstitions bled into medieval European folklore. Now, to be fair, another prominent scholar, John Clarke, disputes how universal this specific bean belief was in 12th century England.
So it might not be a perfect one-to-one connection.
Right. But the broader folkloric connection exists. The narrative motif of otherworldly visitors who refuse human food and will only consume the food of the dead is a massive symbolic marker.
Okay, but here's where my modern brain really struggles with the folklore angle.
Yeah.
When we think of modern folklore like alien abduction stories, it's almost always one person.
Right, the lone witness.
It's a guy driving alone on a lonely desert road at 3 a.m. who sees a light. But the Green Children weren't seen by a lone sleep-deprived farmer. They were found by a whole group of reapers in broad daylight and taken to a bustling manor full of servants and knights.
That's a very fair point.
Doesn't a mass sighting make it less like a fairy tale and more like a documented historical event?
That's a very modern assumption, projecting our current UFO culture backward. What's fascinating about medieval fairy encounters is that they were frequently communal.
Wait, communal?
Yes. Medieval texts are full of stories where entire manors or groups of knights on patrol or whole villages experience a supernatural event together.
Really? Whole villages seeing fairies?
Absolutely. Think about how a rumor spreads through your office or your neighborhood today. Someone sees something unusual, they tell 3 people, those 3 tell 10, and the story solidifies.
Right.
Now imagine that same game of telephone, but in a society where magic, demons, and fairies are considered absolute scientific facts. A communal sighting in the 12th century doesn't necessarily prove physical reality. It reflects how a tight-knit, insular society processed the unknown collectively. The community constructs the myth together.
That reframes it completely. And we also have to look at how Ralph of Coggeshall describes Agnes later in life. After she integrates, he calls her wanton and impudent.
Right, which is very telling.
Now, as a modern reader, I just assumed she was a rebellious teenager who didn't want to work as a servant. But if we are viewing this through the lens of medieval folklore, what does wanton signify?
It aligns perfectly with the established literary tropes of fairy women. In the folklore of the time, when women from the otherworld fairies, water nymphs, selkies integrate into human society, they are almost always depicted as dangerously seductive, lascivious, or fundamentally unable to conform to strict Christian morality.
Ah, so she's uncontrollable.
They're inherently disruptive. By describing Agnes as wanton, Ralph isn't just giving a performance review of a servant. He is subtly reinforcing her otherworldly, non-human origins to his readers. He's saying, see, she never truly lost her fairy nature.
So it's entirely possible this whole story is a pure folkloric myth that just got accidentally logged as history by men who couldn't tell the difference.
It's very possible.
But there's another symbolic reading that blew my mind, and it moves away from fairies entirely. It's from Jeffrey Jerome Cohen, a prominent literary scholar. And he argues this isn't just a fairy tale to scare children. It's a deep psychological, political allegory about race, colonialism, and conquest.
Yes, Cohen's theory is incredibly thought-provoking. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look back to what William of Newburgh was actually trying to achieve.
With his history book.
Right. Remember, William was writing to create a grand narrative of a unified England. The Norman conquest had happened a century earlier, in 1066. William was trying to show how the invading Norman French conquerors and the native Anglo-Saxons were seamlessly blending into one unified, harmonious English identity.
But to create that neat, unified picture of England, you have to purposefully ignore all the people who were violently pushed to the edges to make room for it.
Exactly. You have to ignore the indigenous Britons, the Welsh, the Irish, the Scots. These were the populations that the new Anglo-Norman machine conquered, marginalized, and subjected to forced cultural assimilation.
It's a dark history.
It is. Cohen suggests that the Green Children are a literary manifestation of this suppressed historical guilt and trauma. They represent the unannexable other. They literally crawl up out of the British soil speaking an ancient, incomprehensible language, refusing the diet of the colonizers.
Oh, wow. So the children represent the ancient indigenous people of the island, and their respective fates are metaphors for colonization.
That's the argument.
The boy who refuses to adapt, who cannot stomach the new diet, who stays sickly, depressed, and dies, represents the indigenous cultures that perish rather than assimilate to Norman English rule.
And the girl, Agnes, who survives, how does she survive?
She gives up her greenness.
She survives only by losing her greenness, abandoning her native tongue, and learning English. She represents forced assimilation. She is absorbed into the dominant culture, she marries into it, but at the absolute cost of her original identity.
That is heavy.
Cohen argues that William of Newburgh felt compelled to include this bizarre story, even though he hated it, because subconsciously, it was the only way he could write about the violent, messy reality of how England was actually forged. The Green Children were the suppressed guilt of a nation bleeding through the pages of its own history.
That is a staggering way to look at it. It takes a weird local legend about kids eating beans and turns it into a profound, heartbreaking commentary on colonialism.
It's a very powerful reading.
But, look, I can't do a full deep dive on the Green Children of Woolpit without touching on the absolutely wildest theories out there. Because the internet loves this story, and the internet does not do subtle political allegory.
Right, it certainly doesn't. We must address the speculative theories, if only to understand how the story has evolved in the modern consciousness.
Right, because people have been projecting their own obsessions onto these kids for centuries. Very early on, in 1621, a famous writer named Robert Burton suggested in his massive book, The Anatomy of Melancholy, that the children literally fell from heaven.
Just dropped right out of the sky.
Yeah. And then, if you jump to the modern era, you get theorists like Duncan Lunan. He proposed that the children were literally extraterrestrials.
Of course, aliens.
Specifically, he argued that a matter transmitter on their home planet malfunctioned, beaming them accidentally to Suffolk. And the reason they were green, because on their home planet, they consumed genetically modified alien plants.
It is a striking, almost comical example of how we retrofit ancient historical mysteries with our current technological anxieties.
Exactly. I love it because it makes you ask, why do we continually update our myths? Yesterday's fairies from the underworld are today's extraterrestrials from a malfunctioning teleporter.
That's all about our current vocabulary.
Yes. The villagers in 1150 looked at these kids and saw fairies because magic and demons were their cultural vocabulary. In 1990, someone looks at the exact same text and sees alien abductees because sci-fi and UFOs are our cultural vocabulary. It says absolutely nothing about the children of Woolpit, but it says everything about the audience reading this story.
Which brings us to a crucial synthesis. We have looked at Flemish mercenaries, hyperchromic anemia, Medieval fairy tropes, colonial allegories, and malfunctioning teleporters. This raises the ultimate question.
What actually happened?
Right, what is the actual bedrock beneath all these layers of myth and medicine?
So if you have to put your expert hat on, synthesize all of this conflicting evidence, and give me a verdict, what is the most plausible reality here?
If we strip away the supernatural interpretations and we discard the extreme speculative theories, the most plausible reality is a deeply, profoundly tragic one. We are likely looking at two severely traumatized, deeply malnourished, orphaned children.
Just two scared kids.
Yeah, exactly. Whether they were the children of Flemish immigrants fleeing the bloody aftermath of Fornham, or simply children from an isolated, deep forest English village whose parents died of famine or disease during the anarchy, the result is the same. They found themselves alone, starving, and utterly lost in the dense woods of East Anglia.
And they stumble out of those woods, covered in the dirt of the wolf pits, suffering from a severe case of chlorosis that gives their pale skin a sickly, terrifying greenish hue.
And they can't even ask for help.
Right. They are babbling in a regional dialect or a foreign language the locals genuinely don't know, and they are driven half mad by hunger.
Yes, and they stumble into a community that is itself deeply traumatized. A village that has spent 20 years surviving civil war, mercenary raids, and famine. You have severe childhood trauma colliding head-on with profound societal trauma.
And that collision creates the myth.
Because the human brain, especially in an era lacking modern scientific, linguistic, or psychological frameworks, cannot simply process pure, senseless tragedy. It needs a narrative to protect itself. It wraps the unbearable trauma in myth to make it digestible.
The villagers didn't want to look at those children and see starving, orphaned refugees of a brutal, endless war, because that would mean acknowledging the fragility of their own lives. They chose to see magical visitors from St. Martin's Land. It's a psychological coping mechanism for the observers as much as the observed.
Exactly. The story of the Green Children survives for 9 centuries, not because it's a cute fairy tale, but because it so perfectly captures a universal human anxiety. It is the ultimate story of encountering the other.
It really is.
It asks the most fundamental question of society. How do we treat the outsider who looks different, speaks a language we don't understand, and eats food we find strange? And it shows how incredibly porous the boundary between harsh physical reality and mythic storytelling truly is.
It's a mirror reflecting our own fears and our desperate need to make sense of a chaotic world. And that brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with, the listener.
It's a powerful one.
We've spent an hour talking about St. Martin's Land. We've debated whether it was a physical place like the Grimes Graves flint mines, or a fairy realm, or a colonial metaphor, or just a lie they made up. But what if it was none of those?
Right.
What if St. Martin's Land was the literal psychological manifestation of childhood PTSD?
It makes so much sense when you break it down.
Think about it. Put yourself in the mind of a child whose parents were slaughtered in front of you. To survive, you are forced to flee into the pitch-black, suffocating labyrinth of an underground flint mine. You are down there for weeks in the dark, starving to death, terrified to make a sound.
The human mind can only take so much.
Your developing brain might simply break. To cope with the sensory deprivation, the agonizing starvation, and the absolute horror of your reality, your mind might construct a twilight world. A protective fantasy where the darkness isn't a tomb, but a magical land of eternal evening.
A place where you're safe.
Where the green of your starving, anemic skin isn't a sign of death, but just the normal color of everyone around you. The magic of the Green Children might just be the heartbreaking, incredible reality of how a child's mind constructs a fantasy to protect itself from the unspeakable horrors of the adult world.
It is a sobering, profoundly empathetic way to view the legend. It strips away the magic and replaces it with sheer human resilience.
And I think it fundamentally changes how you look at the myths we construct about outsiders today. I want you to mull that over. Look at the stories we tell about the people crossing our borders, the people who seem alien to us, the people fleeing conflict.
It's very relevant.
Are we still wrapping our anxieties in modern myths? Are we still inventing stories to avoid looking at the raw, tragic humanity of the people emerging from the woods?
It's a question we really need to keep asking ourselves.
Absolutely. To everyone supporting GL Deep Dives, thank you. We wouldn't be able to spend an hour unraveling 900-year-old mysteries without you. If you enjoyed unpacking this incredible story with us, please make sure to follow and subscribe so you don't miss our next exploration into the unknown. Until next time, keep questioning the stories you're told.